Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really interesting set of articles to dive into today, all about Elon Musk and his connections to some pretty powerful figures.
Yeah, figures like Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump.
Perfectly.
We're going to be exploring whether Musk's actions have maybe crossed the line from business into geopolitics, especially with the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict thing.
All right, let's jump right in. These articles highlight some reported conversations between Musk and Putin over the last couple of years. What do we know about these conversations, and why are they causing such a stir?
Well, just imagine this, okay? One of the world's most powerful tech CEOs just casually chatting with the leader of a nation in the middle of a huge international conflict.
Wow.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, right? These conversations, as they've been reported, they go way beyond just like, polite small talk and get into some pretty sensitive territory about the war in Ukraine.
Okay, it's definitely more than just like, hey, how's the weather over there kind of stuff.
Exactly.
The articles mention something about red lines being discussed.
What does that even mean in this context?
So think of red lines as like the ultimate boundaries, you know, the things you absolutely will not budge on.
The non-negotiables.
Yeah, exactly. In this case, they refer to Russia's core demands and the actions they just won't tolerate.
I see.
There's this well-respected geopolitical analyst named Ian Bremmer.
Yeah.
And according to him, Musk told him about a conversation where these red lines were front and center. To give you a concrete example, a red line for Russia could be something like NATO expansion into Ukraine.
Right.
Or maybe Ukrainian forces directly attacking Russian territory.
So we're talking about some seriously high-stakes diplomacy here.
Oh, absolutely. The kind of stuff that could literally make or break a war.
And Musk is just casually strolling into this diplomatic minefield? This is getting interesting.
It gets even wilder. Bremer also mentioned that Musk apparently went so far as to suggest a peace plan to Putin.
Whoa, hold on a sec.
A peace plan that basically aligned with these red lines. A tech CEO known for electric cars and shooting rockets into space suddenly becomes an international peacemaker.
Right. It's a wild twist no one saw coming.
Is this real life, or are we in some kind of alternate reality?
It's a total head-scratcher.
Yeah.
But hold on, there's more. Musk denies these claims.
Really?
Yeah, he says that his conversations with Putin were all about space stuff. And that they never talked about the war in Ukraine.
So we have two completely different versions of what happened.
Exactly, and it just adds to the mystery.
So totally.
But, it's interesting. Regardless of whether they talked about the war or not, the fact that these conversations are even happening is causing a lot of buzz and debate.
Right. I mean, it raises a huge question.
Yeah.
Is Elon Musk stepping outside his role as a business leader and into the world of international diplomacy?
It's the million-dollar question.
So let's talk about this supposed peace plan.
Okay.
What exactly did Musk propose, and how did people react?
Well, Musk's peace plan, which, by the way, he just casually dropped on social media, was definitely bold.
Bold how?
Well, he suggested that Ukraine should just hand over Crimea to Russia for good.
Whoa.
We're talking about a territory that Russia grabbed back in 2014.
Right, but which is still internationally recognized as part of Ukraine.
Exactly. And on top of that, he proposed UN-supervised elections in the Donbas region.
Another disputed area.
Yep. And to top it all off, he wanted Ukraine to promise to stay neutral in international affairs.
So basically, Ukraine would give up control of disputed territories and promise not to side with the West.
You got it.
I can see why that would ruffle some feathers.
Oh, you can say that again.
Yeah.
Ukrainian officials were furious.
I bet.
They saw it as surrendering to Russia, rewarding their aggression, and a total betrayal of their fight for independence.
I can't blame them for feeling that way.
Yeah, they felt like Musk's plan set a really dangerous precedent for how countries deal with each other on the world stage.
It sounds like Musk's attempt at international diplomacy kind of blew up in his face.
Yeah, it didn't exactly go as planned.
So there's that whole peace plan debacle, but his involvement in the conflict goes beyond just that.
Oh, yeah.
His company, Starlink, the satellite internet company, has also been a major player in this whole thing.
Absolutely. You see, Starlink was a total game changer in the early days of the war.
Right, because it provided internet access to Ukrainians when other communication networks were down.
Exactly. It was their lifeline.
So how did Starlink actually influence the conflict?
Well, it allowed Ukrainian forces to stay connected, coordinate their operations, and gather intelligence, even when the usual communication infrastructure was totally crippled.
Wow, so Starlink basically helped level the playing field.
You could say that, but here's where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
Musk has total control over how Starlink is used, and his decisions have sparked some serious debate.
for example?
Well, he refused to allow Starlink to be used in Crimea, even by the Ukrainian military.
Even though it's internationally recognized as part of Ukraine?
You got it. He said he was worried about escalating the conflict, but it raised a lot of eyebrows.
I can see why. It's like he was restricting Ukraine's ability to defend their own territory.
Exactly. And this wasn't the only time he limited Starlink's use in certain areas. It's made people wonder if he's making these decisions purely for business reasons or if there's something else going on.
Like, what else could be motivating him?
Well, some people think he might be trying to stay on Russia's good side.
Why would he do that?
Maybe because SpaceX, his other company, has business interests in Russia.
I see.
Or maybe it has something to do with those controversial conversations with Putin we talked about earlier.
Right.
Either way, it raises a huge question.
What's that?
When one person has so much control over a technology that can directly affect a war, what does that mean for global security and international relations?
Yeah, that's pretty unsettling when you think about it.
Absolutely unsettling. And things get even more complicated when you factor in Musk's support for Donald Trump and his America First policies.
Right, the articles definitely highlight that connection. So how does Musk's support for Trump and America First fit into all of this?
Okay, so America First is basically all about putting national interest ahead of global cooperation.
Right.
It often involves a pretty skeptical view of international institutions and alliances.
Like the UN or NATO?
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, critics argue that this America First approach, even if unintentionally, lines up with what leaders like Putin want.
How so?
Well, Putin's all about weakening Western alliances and shaking up the current global order.
I see.
And they say that America First kind of plays right into his hands.
It's like accidentally clearing the way for him to get what he wants.
Precisely. So when you combine Musk's support for America First with his actions that seem to benefit Russia, it makes you wonder,
Wonder what?
is he consciously or not playing a role in this global power shift that could benefit figures like Putin?
It's a question worth pondering.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, with each piece revealing a whole new layer of complexity, and we've got Elon Musk right at the center of it all. It's a fascinating puzzle to try to solve.
But if Musk's actions are aligning with figures who want to shake up the world order, are there any consequences? I mean, can anyone hold him accountable?
That's the million-dollar question, and it brings us to one of the hottest topics in all of this, the possibility of sanctions.
Whoa, sanctions? Are we talking about the kind they impose on people who support Russia's actions?
Yep, those very sanctions.
Are things really that serious when it comes to Musk?
Believe it or not, there are some serious discussions happening about whether slapping sanctions on Musk is something we should consider.
Wow.
You see, given his potential alignment with Russian interests and his influence over these really powerful technologies, some people think he should be held accountable.
Just like anyone else who's helping Russia.
Exactly. But of course, it's not that simple.
Right.
Sanctioning an American billionaire is a pretty drastic move.
Right.
It really highlights how much power and influence he has.
Okay, so let's dive into this whole sanction thing a bit more.
Okay.
What exactly are sanctions, and how would they even apply to Musk?
Well, think of sanctions as a way to put pressure on someone.
Pressure to do what?
To stop doing something the international community doesn't like.
Okay.
Governments use them to punish individuals or groups that are doing things that are harmful or considered unacceptable.
So basically hitting them where it hurts?
Exactly. Sanctions can involve all sorts of things.
Like what?
They can freeze your assets, restrict your travel, cut you off from financial systems, or even impose trade embargoes.
So in Musk's case, we could be talking about targeting his wealth, his ability to do business around the world, and maybe even his control over SpaceX and Tesla.
You got it. The goal is to make things so uncomfortable and damage their reputation so badly that they'll stop whatever they're doing that triggered the sanctions in the first place.
That makes sense.
But here's the catch.
What's that?
Sanctions can have a lot of unintended consequences.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Musk is deeply connected to the American economy and all the innovation happening here. So hitting him with sanctions could cause a ripple effect that hurts American businesses, disrupts supply chains, and maybe even slows down progress in important areas.
So it's a really tough call.
It's a delicate balancing act.
Right. You have to weigh the potential benefits of stopping someone from doing something harmful against the risks of causing collateral damage.
Exactly. And that's why there's so much debate about whether sanctions are the right move.
It sounds like uncharted territory.
It is. There's no easy answer.
So if sanctions might not be the best option, What else can we do? How do we hold powerful people like Musk accountable when what they do affects everyone?
That's the big question, and it's something that governments and international organizations are wrestling with right now.
It's a new problem.
You see, we're living in a time of super fast technological advancement and globalization, and the systems we have in place to manage all of this, they're struggling to keep up.
So we need new rules for a new world.
Exactly. People are starting to realize that we need to come up with fresh ideas and regulations to deal with this new reality where private individuals have so much influence on global affairs.
What could these new rules look like?
It's still early days, but there are some interesting ideas out there.
Like what?
Some experts say we need more transparency.
Okay.
They think companies operating in sensitive areas like satellite communications or artificial intelligence should be required to share more information about what they're doing. They should have to be open about how they make decisions and whether they have any conflicts of interest.
So basically shining a light on their operations to make sure they're playing by the rules?
Exactly. That way it's harder for them to do things that could be harmful without anyone noticing.
I like it. What else?
Another idea is to create international codes of conduct.
A rule book for how to behave on the world stage.
Exactly. These codes would outline what's considered acceptable behavior, set clear boundaries, and provide ways to address complaints or hold those who break the rules accountable.
And these rules wouldn't just apply to countries.
Right. They would also apply to powerful individuals and companies.
So no one gets to play by their own rules.
Exactly.
What other ideas are out there?
Well, some people think we should give existing international organizations more power.
Like the UN.
Exactly. Maybe give them more authority to monitor whether countries are complying with international agreements or to step in and mediate disputes.
I see.
And maybe even give them the power to penalize those who break the rules.
So basically, a more powerful and adaptable global system that can keep up with the changing times.
Precisely.
It sounds like there's a lot of brainstorming going on right now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're entering uncharted territory here,
Yeah.
and everyone's trying to figure out the best way forward. But one thing's for certain, we can't ignore this issue.
The stakes are too high?
Absolutely. What Musk is doing is a wake-up call.
Yeah.
It shows that we urgently need new ways of thinking about power, responsibility, and accountability in a world where the lines between private companies and governments are getting blurrier by the day.
This is heavy stuff. It's like we've uncovered a much bigger conversation about the future of our world.
You're absolutely right. It's not just about Musk. It's about how power is shifting and the challenges we face in navigating this new global landscape.
It's a lot to take in.
I hear you. It's a lot to process, but it's also incredibly important. We need to have these tough conversations, examine the nuances, and really grapple with the implications of what we're seeing unfold.
Okay, I'm ready to take a deep breath and process everything we've talked about so far before we dive into the rest.
Sounds good.
What's coming up next in our exploration of Elon Musk and his impact on the world stage?
But we've laid the groundwork by looking at Musk's actions and connections. Now it's time to connect the dots to the bigger picture.
Okay.
We'll take a closer look at America first and how it might be shaping the global order. And then we'll dig deeper into the arguments for and against sanctioning Musk.
Okay.
We'll explore the potential consequences and whether there are other ways to hold him accountable. And finally, we'll gaze into the future.
Sounds...
We'll think about what all this means for the role of powerful individuals in international affairs and what we should be keeping an eye on as this story continues to unfold.
I can't wait to hear more. Let's take a quick break and then dive back in.
Okay, so we've been focusing a lot on Musk himself and all the things he's been doing.
Right, his conversations with Putin, his peace plan, his whole Starlink situation.
Exactly. But to really get the full picture, we need to zoom out a bit.
Okay, I'm ready to broaden our perspective.
Good, because what we're seeing here is part of a much bigger trend.
What do you mean?
Well, the balance of power in the world is shifting.
How so?
It's not just countries calling the shots anymore.
Right. I'm starting to see that.
Private individuals and big companies, they're having more and more influence in global affairs.
And Musk is a prime example of that.
Exactly. He's kind of a poster child for this whole phenomenon.
It's like the old rules are being thrown out the window and everyone's scrambling to figure out what the new rules are.
That's a great way to put it. And this new reality, it brings up a ton of questions.
Like what?
Well, like who gets to decide how these powerful technologies are used? Are there any safeguards in place to make sure they're used responsibly? How do we ensure transparency and accountability? when it's not governments making the decisions, but private individuals?
Yeah, those are some really important questions.
Questions we really need to be asking ourselves.
And when you throw Musk's support for Trump and America First into the mix, it just adds another layer of complexity.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
So let's dig a little deeper into America First and what it all means.
Okay.
At its core, America First is all about putting national interests above everything else.
Right.
It often comes with a healthy dose of skepticism towards international institutions and alliances.
So basically going it alone instead of working with other countries.
You got it. And critics argue that this approach, even if unintentionally, aligns with what leaders like Putin want.
Putin. But he's on the opposite side of the political spectrum from Trump.
True, but their goals might overlap in some ways.
Really? How so?
Well, Putin wants to weaken Western alliances and disrupt the current global order.
Right.
And some people argue that America First plays right into his hands.
So even though Trump and Putin are on opposite sides, they might be contributing to the same outcome.
It's a possibility and a pretty unsettling one if you think about it.
Yeah, it's like they're both chipping away at the foundation of the global system.
Exactly. And when you add Musk's actions into the equation, it raises the question of whether he's consciously or unconsciously contributing to this shift in global power.
A shift that could benefit figures like Putin.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the question of accountability.
Right. What can we actually do if Musk's actions are raising all these red flags?
Well, we talked about sanctions earlier, but as we discussed, there are some potential downsides to going down that road.
Right. Could backfire and end up hurting American businesses and innovation.
Exactly. So if sanctions aren't the ideal solution, what other options do we have? How do we hold these powerful individuals accountable in this new world order where the old rules don't seem to apply anymore?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and it's one that's keeping a lot of people up at night.
So what are some of the ideas being tossed around?
Well, one idea that's gaining traction is to create new frameworks and regulations specifically designed to deal with the unique challenges posed by private actors in global affairs.
So basically, we need new rules for a new game.
Exactly. We need rules that emphasize transparency, accountability, and ethical behavior.
Rules that apply not just to countries, but to individuals and companies with a global reach.
You got it. And these new rules need to be baked into the very fabric of how things work.
So how do we make that happen?
Well, there are a few approaches being considered. One idea is to require more transparency from companies operating in sensitive areas.
Okay.
Like, let's say, a company like SpaceX, which controls crucial satellite infrastructure.
Right.
They could be required to disclose more information about their operations, how they make decisions, and any potential conflicts of interest they might have.
So shining a light on their activities to prevent any funny business.
Exactly. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say.
What other ideas are on the table?
Well, another approach is to develop international codes of conduct, specifically for private actors who are involved in things that have global consequences.
So kind of like a global rule book for responsible behavior.
Precisely. These codes would clearly outline what's acceptable and what's not, and they would provide mechanisms for dealing with complaints and holding those who break the rules accountable.
So no one gets to operate in a Wild West environment.
Exactly. Everyone has to play by the rules.
What else?
Another option is to give more power to existing international institutions.
You mean like beefing up the UN?
Exactly. Maybe give them more authority to keep an eye on what everyone's doing, media disputes, and even punish those who violate international agreements.
So basically creating a more powerful and responsive global system that can keep up with the changing times.
Precisely. We need a system that can handle the complexities of this new world order.
It sounds like there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, there's definitely no shortage of challenges, but it's crucial that we start having these conversations and exploring different solutions.
Because if we don't,
Well, if we don't, we risk sleepwalking into a future where a handful of powerful individuals and corporations call all the shots, and the rest of us are left scrambling to catch up.
and that's not a future any of us want.
Absolutely not. We need to be proactive and shape the future we want to see.
Okay, so we've talked about the need for new rules and a more robust global system, but let's bring it back to the individual level for a moment.
Okay.
What about Musk himself? What can we do to hold him accountable for his actions?
Well, as we've discussed, sanctions are one option, but they're not without their risks and drawbacks.
So what else can we do?
One thing we can all do is stay informed and engaged.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more we understand about what's happening, the better equipped we are to hold those in power accountable.
And that includes holding ourselves accountable too, right?
Right. Absolutely. We all have a responsibility to think critically about how our own actions and choices contribute to the world we're creating.
So it's not just about pointing fingers at others.
No, it's about taking ownership of our own role in this global ecosystem.
And recognizing that we all have the power to make a difference.
Exactly. Whether it's through our consumer choices, our political engagement, or simply the conversations we have with friends and family, we can all contribute to creating a more just and equitable world.
I like that. A call to action for all of us.
Exactly. This is a moment of great transformation and opportunity. We have the chance to reshape the world in profound ways, but it's going to require all of us to step up and play our part.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, let's recap the key takeaways from this part of our deep dive.
All right, let's do
We
it.
talked about how the global balance of power is shifting with private individuals and corporations playing an increasingly influential role.
Right, and we explored how this shift might be connected to the rise of America First and the potential for a more fragmented and unpredictable world.
We also discussed the challenges of holding powerful individuals like Musk accountable and the need for new frameworks and regulations to govern this new landscape.
And we emphasize the importance of individual responsibility, staying informed and engaged, and using our collective power to shape a future that benefits everyone.
Wow, it's a lot to think about.
It definitely is, but it's also incredibly exciting. We're living through a period of unprecedented change, and the decisions we make now will determine the course of human history for generations to come.
I'm ready for the final part of our deep dive. Let's continue exploring this fascinating and complex topic. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Musk's actions, his connections, the whole America First thing, and how it all fits into this bigger picture of global power dynamics.
Right.
It's a lot to process, and honestly, it's a little unsettling.
I get it. It is unsettling. We're witnessing a pretty fundamental shift in the global landscape. And when the ground beneath your feet starts to move,
It can be a little scary.
it can be. It really can. And the thing is, we're still trying to figure out the rules of the game in this new reality.
So if the rules are being rewritten, what does that even mean for the future? Like, what are the long-term consequences of all this power shifting around?
Well, one potential outcome, and it's something a lot of experts are worried about, is that the current global order could start to crumble.
Crumble.
Yeah, you see, the system we have now, the one that's been in place since World War II, it relies on international institutions, alliances, cooperation between countries. But as private individuals and corporations gain more power,
It throws a wrench in the gears.
exactly, the system starts to get weaker, more fragmented.
So are we headed towards a world where national interests don't matter as much?
It's a possibility.
Like a world where powerful individuals and companies get to call the shots and they're only looking out for themselves?
That's the fear, right?
Yeah.
That the pursuit of profit will trump global cooperation and stability.
And then what? What happens?
Well, imagine a world where it's almost impossible to address global challenges like climate change, pandemics, economic instability.
Because everyone's just out for themselves.
Right. Instead of a unified global response, you have a bunch of competing interests all pulling in different directions.
And the problems just keep getting worse.
That's one possible scenario, and it's not a pretty one. It's a world where the people with the power to make a difference are more interested in their own bottom line than the fate of humanity.
It's a bleak outlook for sure.
It is, but it's not the whole story. There's another side to this coin.
Okay, I'm willing to hear the optimistic side.
Good, because there are potential benefits to this power shift too. It's not all doom and gloom.
So what's the upside?
Well, think about it. Private individuals and corporations, they don't have to deal with all the bureaucracy and political gridlock that often slows governments down.
So they can move faster.
They can,
Yeah.
and they can take more risks.
Yeah.
They can drive innovation in ways that traditional institutions just can't.
So they could actually be a force for good in areas where governments have failed to deliver.
Exactly. We've already seen glimpses of this with companies like SpaceX and Tesla pushing the boundaries in space exploration and electric vehicles.
Right.
Now imagine that same energy and innovation being applied to problems like climate change, poverty, disease.
There's potential there.
Huge potential. We might see breakthroughs and solutions that would never have been possible within the old system.
So it's not all bad news.
Not at all. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah.
There's potential for both good and bad outcomes, and it all depends on how this newfound power is used.
It all comes down to choices.
It does. The choices we make individually and collectively will determine the course of our future.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it's also empowering. We're not just passive bystanders in this global trauma. We have a say in how this story unfolds.
So how do we make sure this power is used for good? What can we do to prevent those worst-case scenarios from becoming reality?
Well, it starts with recognizing that we're at a crossroads. The decisions we make now will have a ripple effect for generations to come.
No pressure.
Right.
Right.
But seriously, we need to ask ourselves some tough questions. Like, what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want a world where power is concentrated in the hands of a few? Or do we want a world where power is more distributed, where individuals and communities have a greater say in shaping their own destinies?
Those are some big questions.
They are, but they're the questions we need to be asking ourselves right now.
Okay, so before we get too lost in these philosophical quandaries, let's bring it back to Musk for a second.
Okay.
We talked about sanctions, but also about how they might not be the best solution. So if we're not going to sanction him, what else can we do? How do we hold powerful individuals accountable in this new world order?
Well, it's a tough question, and there are no easy answers. But I think it starts with recognizing that we need new approaches, new ways of thinking about power, responsibility, and accountability.
So we need to get creative.
We do. We need to come up with innovative solutions that address the unique challenges of this new landscape.
Like what? What are some concrete examples of things we could do?
Well, one idea that's gaining traction is to mandate greater transparency from companies that operate in sectors with major global implications.
So like companies that control critical infrastructure or have access to sensitive data.
Exactly. For example, a company like SpaceX, which controls a vast network of satellites.
Right.
They could be required to disclose more information about their operations, their decision-making processes, any potential conflicts of interest.
So more sunlight, less secrecy.
Exactly. It's about making sure that these powerful entities are operating in a responsible and accountable way.
That makes sense. What else?
Another approach is to develop international codes of conduct, specifically for private actors who are engaged in activities that have global consequences.
So basically a set of ethical guidelines for how to behave on the world stage.
Exactly. These codes would outline responsible behavior, establish clear boundaries, and provide mechanisms for addressing grievances and holding those who violate the rules accountable.
It's like creating a global rule book for good corporate citizenship.
I like that.
Are there any other ideas out there?
Well, another option is to strengthen existing international institutions and give them more authority to oversee the actions of private actors.
So basically giving organizations like the UN more teeth.
Exactly. This could involve giving them greater power to monitor compliance with international agreements, mediate disputes, or even impose penalties on those who break the rules.
It's about creating a more robust and responsive global governance system.
Right. A system that can keep up with the rapid pace of change and the increasing complexity of the world we live in.
It sounds like a daunting task.
It is, but it's a necessary one. The stakes are simply too high to ignore this challenge.
So what's the key takeaway here? What do we want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that we're not powerless in the face of these challenges. We all have a role to play in shaping the future. We can choose to be passive observers, or we can choose to be active participants in creating the world we want to see.
So it's a call to action.
It is. It's a call to stay informed, to engage in critical thinking, to hold those in power accountable, and most importantly, to remember that our individual choices and actions do matter.
That's a powerful message.
It is. It's a message of hope and possibility. We have the power to shape the future, but it's up to us to use that power wisely.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive.
It does.
We've explored some complex and challenging issues today, but I think we've also uncovered some important insights and hopefully sparked some meaningful conversations.
I hope so, too.
So to our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. And remember, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a better future.
That's what it's all about.
Until next time, this is The Deep Dive signing off.